Welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. If you are not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. In this video, we are going to see how to add PingFederate as a SAML identity provider in Cognito. PingFederate is one of the most widely used products in the IAM domain. Many organizations use PingFederate for both customer identity access management as well as for enterprise identity and access management. So before getting into the configuration steps, I will quickly explain the end-to-end flow on how a user can log in using PingFederate credentials to a client application that is secured using Amazon Cognito as the identity provider. So when the user tries to access the client application URL in the browser, the client app will do a browser redirect to Amazon Cognito using authorization code grant flow, and then when the user clicks the button in the login page of Amazon Cognito to initiate a federation with PingFederate, Cognito will post a SAML request, authentication request to PingFederate, and PingFederate will show the login page for the user to enter the credentials in the browser. And once the user enters the credentials and the credentials are valid, PingFederate will generate a SAML response and post the SAML response back to Cognito. And in step number 8, you can see that Cognito will verify the SAML response. And once the SAML response is successfully verified, it will either create or update the local user profile, depending on whether it is the very first time the user is trying to log in or whether the user already logged in before. And after that, Cognito will redirect back to the client app, which is actually a browser redirect. And Cognito will send an authorization code back to the client application. And the client app can then use the authorization code to get ID token, access token, and refresh token. And based on the claims in the ID token and access token, the client app can either allow or deny access to that particular user. So this is the end-to-end flow, and we are going to do the full configuration and then test this end-to-end flow. So I'm going to use the Chrome browser for the Cognito configuration as well as the PingFederate configuration, and then the Mozilla browser for testing this end-to-end setup. So I have a local version of PingFederate running in my laptop, and I'm just going to use that local PingFederate instance for doing this setup. I'm not going to go through all the initial steps of configuring a PingFederate. I'm assuming like you already have a PingFederate instance which is up and running, and you are going to use that PingFederate for configuring a SAML federation between Cognito and that particular PingFederate instance. So let's first start with Cognito. So go to the AWS Cognito service. Let's create a user pool with the basic settings. So let's go through these steps one by one. I'm not going to explain each and every option. You can always explore it at a later point of time. So let's select username here, go to the next page. We can leave this as is. We don't need a MFA. Anyway, we are going to set up federation with PingFederate, so we don't need MFA. And we can disable this option. We don't need self-registration. We don't need these things. You can leave these attributes as is. We will do the mapping when we add PingFederate Identity Provider. And just select this option to get through to the next page. Let's name this user pool as Cognito PFed. And please select this option. Don't forget to select Cognito hosted UI, because in order to set up a federation between user pool and a third-party SAML identity provider, you need Cognito hosted UI. So you need to select this option. And let's enter a domain. It can be any random string as long as it is available. So I will name it as COGPFed. Yes, it is available. And you need to create a client by default. So let me name it as CogPFed client. And for the callback URL, I will use jwt.io, the same URL that I use in all my videos for testing this end-to-end setup. It is very convenient just for the testing purpose. But in reality, when you build your own app, this URL, callback URL, will be a URL within your application. And go to advanced settings, and let's actually select implicit grant and uncheck this authorization code grant. And I have mentioned this multiple times in my past videos as well. I'm repeating it again. Implicit grant is only for the purpose of testing. It already got deprecated in the latest OAuth spec, and most probably it will get removed slowly over the years. I don't know when, but maybe few years down the line it will get removed from all the identity products. But it is very convenient for just the end-to-end testing, just to understand how the end-to-end flow works. But once you have done the entire setup of federation between your client app and a third-party identity provider and tested the end-to-end flow, and if you're sure that it is working fine, then you can always remove this and add the authorization code grant flow again. So as of now, select this, uncheck this, and let's use OpenID profile and email scope, and go to next screen, review all the settings, and create the user pool. So the user pool got created, and you can navigate to each of these tabs and review the configuration or modify based on your requirements. The key values are actually present in this app integration tab, which you can see the domain that we configured, which is cog pfed, followed by the default domain like auth US East 1 AmazonCognito.com, and then the public client that we configured while creating the user pool. So these are the key values. Now let's go to the PingFederate admin console. I am already logged into the console. So let me just refresh to make sure the session is still valid. Yeah, the session is still valid. So now we need to configure the SAML federation between Cognito user pool and PingFederate. So in this SAML federation, PingFederate acts as the IDP and the Cognito user pool acts as the SP. So IDP is the identity provider, SP is the service provider. These are the standard terms that are used in SAML federation. So we are going to start with configuring the identity provider first, and then once we configure the identity provider, we will export the SAML metadata from PingFederate and then configure PingFederate identity provider in Cognito user pool using that metadata. So let's go through one by one step. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not going through the configuration of PingFederate. I am assuming you already have a PingFederate instance. I will go through the key steps which are required for configuring the SAML federation between Cognito and PingFederate. So let's start with the very first step. Let's create an IDP adapter. So I will create a new IDP adapter and name it as Cognito IDP adapter. So I'm going to use the basic IDP adapter. Just one thing. So before configuring the IDP adapter, we need to configure a different one, which is the Credential Validator. So let me first configure the Credential Validator, and then let's configure the IDP adapter. So let's name it as Cognito PCV, Password Credential Validator. And in the type, just for testing purpose, let's use this simple username password credential validator. Ideally, if you're building a production grade application, you will be connecting your PingFederate to some kind of a LDAP directory source. So in that case, you need to use the LDAP username password credential validator, or let's say if you're using the Ping directory product or any other LDAP product, then you need to use this LDAP username password credential validator. And similarly, if you are using Radius server or Ping one, then you need to use a different validator. So in this case, for the purpose of testing, I'm going to use the simple username password credential validator. So go to next screen. Here you can add username and password. So let me add a couple of users, John and Joe. So go to next screen and save. So the password credential validator got created. So let's again go back to the home screen, go to IDP adapters, and let's create a new IDP adapter for this integration. And I'm going to use the form IDP adapter. So basically a form IDP adapter is a standard login page with a username password field. So go to next and let's add this Cognito PCV as the password credential validator and click next. And in the contract, we can leave it as is. Go to the next screen. Here you need to select a pseudonym. So let's select username and let's actually go to next page and save. So basically what we have done is created a password credential validator and then created a a HTML form IDP adapter, which is connected to that password credential validator. So basically what it means is when Cognito redirects to PingFederate, it needs to display the login page. And when the user enters the credentials, PingFederate needs to validate those credentials, right? So this HTML form IDP adapter is the one which represents that login page with a username password field. And when I enter the username and password, PingFederate will use that password credential validator that I added to this Cognito IDP adapter, the password credential validator, which is called as Cognito PCV. And whenever I enter any credentials, it will validate the username and password using the list of users that are configured in this Cognito PCV. So if it is a LDAP database, then it's going to validate the credentials against that LDAP. And if it is a Ping one password credential validator, it will validate the credentials against Ping one. And if it is a Radius server, it will validate using the Radius server. So that's how it works. Now let's go back to the previous page. So you need to do one more thing, like just make sure you have a signing certificate configured. And if you want a signing certificate from a trusted CA provider, you can always get it from the trusted CA provider and import it here. In this case, I am just using a self-signed cert that I created using this create new page. So here you can go like, let me try creating one more. So I will name it as Cognito. And I will use the same for organization, country, US, and click next and save. So it created a new self-signed certificate which is valid until 2024. But if your organization is using a trusted certificate, you can always get a trusted certificate and then come here and import that certificate into PingFederate and use that certificate for signing the SAML assertions. Since this is just a demo, I'm not going to get any trusted certificates. I'm just using a self-signed certificate. But just make sure you already have a certificate configured because it is required when you actually configure the SAML connection in PingFederate for Cognito. And also make sure in the system and server configuration, you have a SAML 2.0 entity ID already configured. If it is not already configured, then PingFederate is not going to work. As I said, all these things should have been done during the initial configuration of PingFederate. I'm just listing down these steps to make sure it's already present and you have all the values in place. So now let's go back to the home screen. And now it is time to configure the Cognito SP as a SP connection in this PingFederate Identity Provider. So go to this SP connections and create a new connection. Use this do not use a template and select browser SSO profiles, and by default it will use SAML protocol. Go to next. Browse again, leave this as is. We don't have a file, so I'm going to enter all the details manually. So use this option none. Go to next step. Here we need to enter the Cognito user pool's entity ID. So let's go to the Cognito documentation, Cognito user pool. Just search for Cognito user pool SAML. The very first link that you see in the Google search is adding SAML identity providers to your user pool. So go to that page, scroll down, and you will see these values. So this is the entity ID of a Cognito user pool. Copy this, go here, paste it, and we need to replace this user pool ID. So go back to the Cognito console, copy the user pool ID, and replace this value. And the next thing is we need to enter this base URL. So let's copy the base URL from same app integration tab, the Cognito domain, that is the base URL. So go here, enter it, go to next page. Okay, I forgot a connection name. So let's name it as Cognito Demo SP. And now we are going to configure all the attribute mappings and all those details. So configure browser SSO and select SP initiated SSO. Please note that Cognito doesn't support IDP initiated SSO. So we need to enable only SP initiated SSO. Go to next page, leave these things as is. Go to next page and configure assertion condition. And go to next page, and we have the attribute contract here. So the attribute contract is basically the list of SAML attributes that will be sent back to Cognito. When a user logs in, PingFederate will validate the credentials and post a SAML assertion back to the SP. That's what it does in step 7 here. So in the SAML assertion, it will send a list of SAML attributes. That's what this contract actually says. So currently only the SAML subject is configured. Let's add some additional attributes like email, name, given name, last name. So all these attributes will be sent back in the SAML assertion, and we can see that while testing. So as of now, add all these attributes, go to next page, and here we need to configure an adapted instance for this particular connection. And if you remember, we already created an adapter called Cognito IDP adapter, so select that one. Go to next page and again go to the next page. Here we need to select the mapping between the SAML attributes and what values will be sent for each of these SAML attributes. So for the SAML subject, we will use the username value that is configured in the adapter. So username is basically, if you remember, in the password credential validator, I configured a couple of users, I think John and Joe. So those are the usernames. So when I log in as John, the username will be John. When I log in as Joe, the username will be Joe. So I'm just going to set the SAML subject to the username. And for the email, let's use expression mapping. And I'm going to actually go to the OGNL expression documentation. And you can see the PingFederate documentation here. and I'm going to use this function, this similar function, to construct the email address from the username. So let's go to edit and let's actually do username, and you can actually test it. So I got the username. I'm going to append a domain to this username, and that will be the email address of this user. So this is just a dummy email address. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm using a simple credential validator, which only allows me to configure a username and password for the user. It doesn't allow me to configure a first name, last name, or an email address. Now, if I had created a credential validator, password credential validator, which is connected to, say, a LDAP directory, then in the LDAP user profile directory, I can actually create a user with first name, last name, email, all those things, and then I can map those values to the email attribute in the SAML contract and the given name and the last name and name. But a simple password credential validator doesn't allow me to use a user profile with all these values. So I'm just creating dummy values based on the username. So it will be like john@example.com when I log in as John, and joe@example.com when I log in as Joe. And similarly for all these values, I'm just going to use that username and append some dummy values. Like for example, I will use underscore given name, and I will use underscore last name, and I will use underscore name. Now, if I go to next, like it's done. The attribute mapping step is done. Like you can click next, and go to done, and again go to next page, and it will show all the summary configuration, the summary of the configuration that we did in the previous steps. Again, click done, go to next. Here we need to configure the protocol settings. So this is the assertion consumer service URL, basically the Cognito user pools URL where the SAML assertion will be posted. So if you go back to this documentation, in the Cognito documentation, it says the assertion consumer URL, consumer service URL is basically your domain prefix.auth region amazoncognito.com/saml2/idp response. So copy this domain value, go back to the screen, and the binding should be post. So select post, select default option, add this URL, go back to this documentation, copy this value, and append that value to the end of this URL and add it. So we have added the assertion consumer service URL, which is basically the Cognito user pool URL where the SAML assertion will be posted back. So basically in this step, step 7, when PingFederate posts the SAML assertion back to Cognito, it will be posted to this particular URL, which is configured here. Go to next page. We don't need artifact or SOAP. Let's just keep post or redirect. Go to next page. We always want the assertions to be signed. So select this option and go to next page. We don't want SAML encryption support for now, at least for this integration, but in your organization, if there is a mandate from your security team that SAML assertions should be encrypted, then you need to follow certain steps in order to enable encryption. I'm not going to go through those steps. It's kind of advanced configuration. So select none. Go to next page, done, and again go to next and click done. So the browser SSO configuration is done, and let's go to the next set of configuration, which is the credentials. So basically we need to sign the SAML assertion, right? like any SAML assertion needs to be signed, and we already selected that option that SAML assertion for this particular connection needs to be signed. In order to sign the SAML assertion, you need a certificate. And if you remember in the initial step, I mentioned that you need a certificate configured in your PingFederate instance. It can be a trusted certificate or a self-signed certificate. And I already created a self-signed certificate. So I'm going to select that same self-signed certificate here. I have a couple of certificates. I created one before. And this is the new one that I created. So I selected that, go to next page, done. Again, go to next. Here you can review your entire settings and you can go back to any page and modify. Like all these are links. So basically you can go to any of these links and modify, and again come back to this final summary page and click save. That's it. The connection is now configured. So basically one side of the SAML federation is configured now. That is, the identity provider side is configured. Now we need to configure the identity provider metadata on the SP side, which in this case is the Cognito user pool. That's what we are going to do in the next step. So in order to do that, I need that metadata file from PingFederate. So select action, export metadata, select the signing certificate that we used for this SP connection. It is this one. Go to next and click export. So the metadata file got exported. Click done. And now let's go back to the Cognito console. Sign in experience. And let's add this identity provider. Excuse me. Let's name it as pfed IDP and choose file and select this metadata. And now let's configure this attribute mapping. So email will be configured to email. Given name to given name. Family name to last name. And name to name. So if you look at this mapping, what it actually does is the attribute names on the left hand side are attribute names of the user profile in the Cognito user pool. And the attribute names on the right hand side are the SAML attribute names that gets posted from the identity provider to the SP, which in this case is Cognito. So if you remember this connection, we actually configured these attributes: email, given name, last name, and name. So we are actually mapping those attributes to the local user profile attributes in the Cognito user pool. So once this is done, you can click add, go to the app integration tab and select this client that we configured, click edit, and let's select this pfed IDP, identity provider, that we configured in the previous step. So what basically it means is user profiles which are configured in this user pool as well as the user profiles in the PingFederate can access this client. So we will see that when we do the testing. So click Save Changes. So in order to test, let's right click this View Hosted UI button and copy the link address. Let's go to Mozilla and let's do the testing. So in Mozilla, there's a very handy plugin called SAML Tracer, which I have explained in multiple videos. It is a very good plugin for testing the end-to-end SAML integration. So I already have it installed. You can also install it, and then when you're testing the SAML federation, you can view all the SAML messages that are getting posted back and forth between the service provider and the identity provider. So paste the URL that you copied from that button link and press enter. So here you can see the username password field where you can enter the local Cognito user pool profiles username password, which we are not interested in for this particular demo. What we are planning to test here is whether the federation between Cognito user pool and PingFederate is working fine or not. So click this button. Yeah. So when I clicked that button, what happened was user pool, Cognito user pool posted a SAML request to the PingFederate Identity Provider, and that's what you see here in the SAML tracer. So I'm going to first log in as John. Click sign on. Yes, so I was able to successfully log in, and that is the reason why you are seeing this jwt.io page with the ID token of Cognito, which is decoded here. So you can see all the details here. John at example.com, John underscore last name, John underscore name, and John underscore given name. So when I logged in as John, PingFederate used that adapter contract that we configured in the previous step, where I used the username as the base value and appended dummy values like underscore given name, underscore last name at example.com, and it posted a SAML assertion back to Cognito. So if you can look at this SAML tracer, so this is the SAML assertion that got posted back to Cognito. You can go to this summary page and you can see all these attributes: last name, given name, name, and email. So based on this, if you go to the Cognito console, Cognito will actually create a local user profile for John. So this is the local user profile which got created. And you can see all those values here: last name, given name, and the dummy email address. So let's again go back to this page and let's do one thing. Let's now log in as Joe. So I will clear this. And this is another plugin in Mozilla for clearing the cookies. There are hundreds of plugins available. You can use any plugin. So I'm clearing the cookies. The reason I'm clearing the cookies is because now when I log into Cognito, I want to see the login page again so that I can log in as Joe instead of John. If I don't clear the cookies, Cognito will reuse that same cookie that was generated for John, and it will not even show the login page. So again, I'm redirected to PingFederate login page. Okay, looks like the saved password was wrong. So let me enter it again. And now I'm logged in as Joe. So you can see Joe at example.com, Joe underscore last name, Joe underscore name, and Joe underscore given name. And I will open the SAML tracer. So here, if you go to the SAML assertion, you can see all those attributes, SAML attributes getting posted back to Cognito. And if you come here and refresh, you will find a new profile that was created for Joe. So basically, if you look at this diagram in step number 8, when Cognito receives the SAML assertion from PingFederate or any other SAML identity provider for that matter, it will actually create a local profile for that user when they log in for the very first time. So that's what happens here. It initially created a profile for John, now for Joe. And if I go to this profile, I can see all the values: Joe underscore last name, underscore given name, and Joe underscore name. So this is how you do the end-to-end configuration between Cognito and PingFederate for SAML federation. It is a bit complex. It's not as easy as like all the other identity providers, but for that matter, it's not easy with any identity provider. But with like PingFederate is slightly complex, so there are lots of steps that needs to be done for setting up this federation. You can always come back and refer each and every step. And if you are still stuck with any of these steps, don't hesitate to post a question in the comments and I will be happy to respond. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and thank you for watching.